Whoa, earthquake. And I think everything's fine. Yeah. Okay. We're going to be doing our limited review and going over a couple of the constructed highlights again. And Ash is kind of here to give us more of a beginner's perspective. She's been playing Magic for just a little bit more. I think like...
you could scoot over a little bit.
Yeah, this is good.
Okay.
For like a week and a half, really, right?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So like she played through the Magic 2015 and beaten that campaign. So she kind of understands a little bit about deck building. We did a draft the other week with friends, Pauper Cube draft. So, you know, she's relatively new, kind of understands card evaluation. So kind of getting her cue on a couple things here will be kind of cool. We talked about the Planeswalkers last time. I think we're actually going to highlight that real quick. Let's go ahead and open that new tab for constructing. Just go over it one more time. Let some people kind of jump in here while we're going through it. But we talked about Kithion, I think, is one of the strongest players to be standard playable and maybe slightly modern playable as a 2-1 for 1 with a low cost to entry, just attacking with multiple creatures. It's pretty easy to achieve, and it doesn't matter that Gideon's fine. It locks up the board a little bit, protects itself okay the turn you cast it with the target creature gains indestructible, or the +2 if your opponent doesn't have creatures. And just to swing in a 4/4 in an aggressive deck. This is a card for an aggressive deck. That's basically all it is a 2-1 that becomes a 4/4 for most games. And bringing up Liliana, I think that Liliana is going to see a lot of standard play. Just whenever another non-creature you control dies, with the sacrifice outlets letting you control easily, but also in an aggressive black shell, just being able to put this down and attack with your creatures and give them unblockable is nice. I think Jace is also going to see standard play with the amount of graveyard effects we have, especially Satyr Wayfinder specifically. Being able to play Jace on turn 2, Satyr Wayfinder on turn 3, does set you up to probably have the cards in the graveyard necessary to use his ability. Now, the top 2 abilities are pretty good in a format where we don't have Snapcaster Mages, standard. The second ability does shine, and the first ability can hold down an early kind of situation. It can make their 2 power creatures do no damage, or their 3 power creatures just do 1 and keep them at 5. We talked about Chandra and it's being strong in standard, right? It only has to attack once, and you cast 1 red spell to flip it, and Nissa being the strongest in standard as well. I think as far as legacy and modern playability goes, we might see some amount of Liliana. I don't think it's strong enough, and we might see Kithion. I don't think the rest of these have what it takes to make modern play. We're going to go ahead and go on to red just after we started up here. So, again, we went through Chandra. Now, Avarice Dragon. 2 red for 4/4 flying. Mythic. At the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card. At the beginning of your end step, discard your hand. Standard-wise, this might be a curve topper for aggressive red. Something that you can play there. Limited-wise, I think this is also a good card. Ash, you have not played too much Magic. How do you feel about drawing an extra card during the start of your turn, but then discarding your whole hand at the end of your turn?
Quick question, what is you said curve topper?
So you would play, in a constructed deck, you would have 1 drops, 2 drops, 3 drops. This would be one of the last cards you played, so it would be one of the last cards of your hand. So you probably wouldn't have a hand, or you might just have a land in hand when you played it.
If I was only losing 1 card, then it would probably be great, but if it was an early play...
Yeah, you're probably not going to play this in a deck where this is going to be one of your first and middle plays. It's going to be the top of your plays. And in a limited deck, often you can wait to play this, or if you have to play it, it's going to be better than the other cards. And if it survives, you draw that other card. It's very easy to make those cards back. As far as limited goes, I think I'd pick this early, but not super aggressively. The double red is a little prohibitive. And if they do manage to kill it, it's going to put you in a kind of rough spot. But I'd probably be willing to commit to red for this. I think it's a above average card, and I'd pick it over most of the commons and uncommons. I think I'd probably pick it over all commons and most uncommons. Abbot of Corel Keep is colorless red for a 2/1 prowess. And that's already pretty solid. Whenever it enters the battlefield, exile the top card of your library until in turn you may play that card. I don't think this is good enough for constructed play. Adding 2 to whatever the cost is going to push it out for the aggressive decks, and that's where this card would want to be. As far as limited goes, I wouldn't pick it highly, just because you're usually going to play this on turn 2 and it's fine, but it's also a good play later, right? If you play it on turn 5 or turn 6 and you have some amount of mana open, it can represent 2 cards.
What do you mean adding 2 to the cost?
So when it enters the battlefield, you exile the top card of your library. So let's say the top card of my library costs 3. Well, I had to pay 2 for this, and then 3 for the next card. So I have to have a total of 5 mana to be able to effectively utilize the ability.
What do you mean play through the next card? Is that because it explicitly doesn't... Because you're going to have to pay for that card, and you're just guessing how much that's going to cost? Or is that an explicit...
Yeah. When Abbot of the Carol Keep enters the battlefield, exile the top card of your library. Until the end of turn, you may play that card. After the end of the turn, you can no longer play that card.
Okay.
So it's a one-time effect. And 3 is just like an average amount. You're going to be running a lot of 2s and 3s, so it'll usually be a 3. But it could be a 4 or however high your mana cost goes up to.
Well, I mean, if it's a... I mean, this is an aggressive card, and what I'm assuming is an aggressive deck, so you probably... I mean... When I build decks like this, I usually have a lot more 1-drops or 2-drops. So for me, that might actually be possible to do and not be really costly.
In draft, we don't normally have a lot of 1-drops.
Okay.
But it's fine. It's okay to play this card on turn 2 and just have a 2-1 prowess and not get the card. Like, a 2-1 prowess for 2 is fine. That's a decent card. And the fact that on turn 6 you can play this and play up to a 4-drop means that it's okay there too. It drew you a card likely. So I think it's a good card. I just don't think I'm going to first pick this card in Limited. Just like when we did the Cube draft, when we picked cards, the card order picking is what we're talking about.
Okay.
Chandra's Ignition, 3 colors, red for a sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent. So the first thing I want to point out here is not constructed playable, by the way. Is in Limited, if they kill your creature in response, your creature has... this has no targets for it, so it'll go ahead and counter itself. It'll fizzle. So there is that risk with it being a sorcery. And it does do to each other creature you control. Now you can control this, right? If you have a bunch of 4-power creatures, or sorry, 4-toughness creature, and you have a 2-power or 3-power creature, you can select a situation or create a board state in your your black-red or your red-green or blue, whatever kind of high-toughness deck you have, where just their stuff dies. Often this is going to kill the whole board. And it doesn't deal damage to you. It just does it to other creatures and your opponent. So if you do it on your biggest creature, if you have a 5/2 or something like that, your creature will be the only creature remaining. I think this is the kind of card I wouldn't first pick either, just because it requires a lot of building around. But it is a powerful effect, and in red, you are going to have a lot of high-power creatures. Remember, it triggers with prowess, so if you cast Chandra's Ignition with an Abbot of the Carol Keep out, it would do 3 damage to everything else. So I think that's pretty powerful. Embermaw Hellion. 3 red for a 4/5 trample. That's already pretty good. That's already passing the bar right there. If another red source you control deals damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage +1 to that permanent or player instead. So your 2/1 deals 3 damage. Your 4/2 deals 5 damage. If you have a spell that does an extra damage, or does damage, it does 1 more, right? Your 2 damage spell becomes a 3 damage spell, etc. That counts for a lot, especially if you're heavy or moderately red. And even things like your Planeswalkers do extra damage. I don't think it's going to see constructed play. I think in Limited, this is a fairly high pick. Just a 4/5 for 4 with trample. Would you be happy with that card in your deck usually?
In Limited, yeah. If I saw that, I'd be like, gimme.
Yeah.
I'm new, so I'm going to ask this question again. Can you describe what Constructed versus Limited is out, just so I can...
Constructed is where you build your deck from all of the cards you own, or all of the cards from a certain sets. Right?
Okay.
Standard is the current 2 sets. Modern is all of the sets past Mirrodin and Forward. Legacy is all of the sets with a few banned cards. And Vintage is all cards. Limited is the thing we did with the Cube, right? We have 15 cards, and you pick one, and then you have 14 cards, and you have a limited card pool to build your deck from.
Okay.
We're primarily focusing on Limited because a lot of these cards just aren't going to hold up. Like, we've talked about these cards, and I think Chandra and Avaricious Dragon are the only 2 that have constructed playability, and they're not even definite things. Constructed's very competitive. There's only usually about 100 total cards that get played out of a 700 or 800 card pool. But Limited, all of these cards we're going to open and see, so we need to evaluate and see what we like about each one and we don't.
Okay.
Embermaw Hellion's ability, even if you're not using that much, it is still very good. You're usually going to have creatures. All those creatures effectively get 1 more power. With Double Strike, they have 2 more power, so a lot of cool different things here. So, I think we've gotten our first very constructed playable card here, an Exquisite Firecraft, 1 red for sorcery, deals 4 damage to target creature or player, Spell Mastery, if you have 2 other instant and or sorceries, it can't be countered. This is, in the mono red aggro decks, this will be a very good spell for killing a lot of creatures, And also it kills cards like Ojutai as well, so I could see it seeing some play in sort of a red X mid-range deck in Constructed. The Can't Be Countered is a very important line of text. We may even see this card played in Modern and Legacy burn decks as well. As a burn player, I could see running one main board and maybe one or two in your sideboard, depending on how your metas kind of shake out. The sorcery is an issue. The fact that you do have to play it on your turn is a little rough. I'm not sure why they couldn't make that an instant. It's not particularly powerful. In Limited, I am happy to pick this. It is a removal spell. Usually it's just a removal spell that kills something for 4. The fact that it costs 1 red means that it's not quite as good as you'd like. I'm still usually going to pick this over most other cards, but I can see some uncommons I'd pick over this. Flame Shadow Conjuring. 3 colorless red enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay red. If you do, put a token into the battlefield that's a copy of that creature. That token gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So you play your creature. If you pay red, you get another copy of that creature that can attack or use its abilities that turn and goes away. How do you feel about that card?
Okay, well, you can pretty much. Okay, so you're gonna be putting this. Okay, no, sorry, it's an enchantment on Aura.
Would you want this card in a deck you have?
I mean, it's got repeatability, right? As long as you're just summoning a lot of creatures, you can make copies of them. But if you're summoning a lot of creatures, they're probably going to be smaller. So I don't know if the.
It's a tricky card.
I don't think I would pick it for. If it came back around a couple more times, I'd consider it, but I don't think it would be. I think somebody would pick it, but I wouldn't.
So for Limited, the card doesn't do anything on its own, which is a big downside. Now, when you're winning, this card does a lot. The problem is when you're losing, unless your creatures have flash and you can get them on your opponent's turn, it doesn't provide blockers. It provides a lot more pressure, but you are paying 4 mana before you're paying 5 mana before you get any effects. 4 up front and with the next stuff. If you have creatures that have enter the battlefield effects, so if you're in the right colors, it's going to do a lot of work. I wouldn't first pick this out of most packs just because I don't know what my deck composition is, but in the second or third packs, if I had a deck that had a lot of enter the battlefield effects, I would heavily look at it. In Constructed, there might be a combo deck that can make use of this. The one red stops it from being too terribly degenerate with everything, but in the non-token part, prevents it from being degenerative as well. There might be a Constructed deck that can take advantage of it. We'll end up finding out. More than likely, you're just looking at a Limited card that has a high ceiling, but also a very low floor. So, not a card I'm excited about usually picking, but a fun card, sort of a build around me. Alright, Goblin Pile Driver. This card is a Constructed All-Star at colorless red for 1/2, pro blue. You don't see protection usually. And whenever it attacks, it gets +2 power and +0 toughness for each other attacking goblin. If there's a goblin deck, this card, which there currently is in Constructed, sort of the small red already kind of has that going on. This card will help you drive through a ton of damage. The protection from blue is just a nice little fringe benefit, not normally going to matter that much. In Limited, I'm not really excited about a 1/2 that gets bigger. I might pull it in and out of my sideboard if I need playing against blue cards, blue mages. So this actually is a very bad Limited card overall because I do not want a 1/2 for 2 in any of my decks. I don't want a 1/2 any reason. If for some reason you had a bunch of goblins, I guess that would be decent, but not even great then because it's only really good when it's aggressive. But yeah, expect to see people try the goblin deck in Constructed and play against it. Molten Vortex. Red enchantment. Red discard a land. Deals 2 damage to target creature or player. This is a card that's very playable in Limited. You are going to have a lot of cards. This doesn't actually cost 1 because you don't play this on turn 1. You usually play this a little bit later. You can play it on turn 1, but you're not going to want to be discarding lands usually unless you have to. But the fact that every single land represents a shock is extremely powerful. I think this is the strongest Limited card we've seen so far because you always run lands. In Constructed, I think this is the kind of card that will let red decks single-handedly push through damage. You sideboard this in against a control deck and you can play it on turn 1 and there's nothing they can do. You're going to keep drawing lands. They're on a very short clock, 10 activations, and they're dead. I think this is the most powerful card we have seen so far, even though it takes multiple turns. It's going to make mono red one of the more powerful anti-combo decks, and in your limited pools, if you can afford to get this, you don't even have to run that much red. Even if you're only discarding 1 land a turn, you're in an excellent spot. This is A+ in Constructed and in that. We'll probably see it played in Modern, Standard, and in Limited as well. Alright. Paya and Kin Nalaar. So we've got the kind of set of legendary creatures that accompany the Planeswalkers. 2 colorless, red for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, put 2/1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creatures with flying on the battlefield. So for 4 mana, we get total 4 power, total 4 toughness. Now, I don't think this is constructed playable. Doesn't quite have the stats for that. But as far as limited go, getting a 4/4 with the across 3 bodies for 4 is excellent. I think this is a solid first pick. Being able to play 2 colors in a red, sacrifice an artifact, and Paya and Kin Nalaar deal 2 damage to target creature or player. So you can sacrifice any. It comes with 2 with it right there. So right off the back, if you get to untap, if you have 6 mana, you can deal 4 damage as you like, and still have a 2/2 body. If you return it to your hand, you get 2 more creatures. So there's a lot of ways to abuse that. It's a very strong card right there, and having more than 1 body is attractive as well. So we're going to go into Scab Clan Berserker. 1 red, haste, renown 1. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, if Scab Clan Berserker is renowned, Scab Clan Berserker deals 2 damage to that player.
What is renown?
Renown is when this creature deals combat damage to a player. If it isn't renowned, put a 1/1 counter on it, and it becomes renowned. So that means that the first time it deals damage to a player, not to a planeswalker, just to a player, it gets a counter equal to the number of renown, which is renown 1 here. And then it has sometimes an effect. This one means whenever your opponent plays a non-creature spell, it'll deal 2 damage to them. So you'll have a 2/2 haste, which means it's usually going to get its renown unless your opponent already has a card. And the fact that it becomes a 3/3, that whenever they play a non-creature spell, it deals 2 to them, is very powerful. I think this card's more powerful in Constructed than Limited. It's a fine pick in Limited, but not super, super great. It's above average. I'd pick it over, most commons and uncommons, but not necessarily all of them. I'd probably pick a decent piece of removal over it. So in Constructed, I think this will see a little bit more play. The fact that if you can get it down, your opponent has to kill it and will take at least 2 damage to kill it probably, puts a lot of pressure on them. This could reasonably deal 4 to 7 damage most games that you can resolve it. Alright, you want to read us the next one here, Ash?
When I finish yawning.
Finish yawning.
Acolyte of the Inferno, 2 colorless red for a 3/1. Renown 1. Whenever Acolyte of the Inferno becomes blocked by a creature, it deals 2 damage to that creature.
So it deals 2 damage to that creature before damage is dealt.
Before damage is dealt. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So you declare your creature as a blocker, and before you go to combat, it just deals 2 damage right to that creature blocking. If you block with both of these creatures, it deals 2 damage to both of them. If you had a Scab Clan Berserker, Paya, Kin, and Nalaar, and both of their creatures, and all those creatures blocked the Acolyte of the Inferno, it'd kill all of them before they even got to deal damage.
I like it a lot, except for the 1 toughness, but I think it's kind of worth the risk.
Yeah, and I feel like it's fairly low risk. Of all of the cards we've seen here, it kills all of them. This 4/5, 2 damage from the ability, 3 for there.
Yeah.
That's a lot of damage. You're going to usually be able to get this renowned. Now here's the thing to point out though. The creatures that would normally survive the 2 damage from the toughness, this will only be a 4/2. So this is all about dealing damage. This isn't going to usually be running defense nearly as well. But it's going to trade up. Your opponent's going to need at least 3 toughness to block it the first time and survive. And it doesn't need a lot of power to trade with this creature, but it's usually going to trade up on that. I think it's one of the more powerful. We haven't seen that many in commons, but I think it's one of the more powerful uncommons in total. You can tell us about this next card?
Call of the Full Moon is a colorless and red enchantment aura. Enchanted creature gets +3/2 and has trample.
It's powerful.
And at the beginning of the upkeep, if the player casts 2 or more spells last turn, sacrifice it.
Now the same player has to cast 2 or more spells, which is the downside. This is kind of a werewolf themed card from Innistrad block. 3/3 and trample is a lot for 2 mana. The problems is this is a solid card except that last line of text. If you play this card, you can't play any other cards that turn because you played this card. If your opponent plays 2 cards, it goes away. Part of the nice effects of this card is it's a lot of power and toughness for 2 mana, but you can't normally cast it on a turn to take advantage of that because you can't cast anything else. I think this card overall is actually not very good. It'll see some play in limited aggressive decks, and that's about it. Enthralling Victor with the Super 6-pack, the buffest guy in Magic.
That's an 8. No, I think that's a 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it's an 8-pack.
An 8-pack, even better than 6. It's 2 more. All right, 3 colors red for a 3/2. When Enthralling Victor enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature and opponent controls with power 2 less until end turn. Untap that creature, gains haste. This is a strong effect, usually, but the fact that it only gets 2 or less power means it's not going to be pressing on as much. It's usually removing a blocker. So if your opponent swings with a lot of their team and leaves back a chump blocker, he can do work. The good news is a 3/2 is usually worth about 3 mana, and that effect isn't quite worth a card, but altogether, this is a card you'll probably run 1 of. I wouldn't want to run more than 1 of, just because the effect's not super strong, but it's usually going to do at least 2 damage to an opponent. Sometimes it can push through quite more if you're pulling off blocker off the other side. In limited. All right. Let's see Fiery Conclusion. What do we got here, Ash?
It is an instant, colorless red. As an additional cost to cast Fury Conclusion, sacrifice a creature. Fire Conclusion deals 5 damage to target creature.
So if I'm fine running 1 of these. Your opponent goes to kill your creature, or they play a combat trick to make your blocks or attacks unfavorable. You can sacrifice the creature and have your creature kill their creature. So your creature that would have died, you saved it, and essentially sacrificed it to this effect. It's a powerful card. It's going to kill the things you want to kill usually. If you have small token makers or a Thopter or other token kind of effects or creatures that aren't as important anymore, Fire Conclusion helps kind of clear the way, gets rid of the big threats. I'm not going to usually play more than 1 of these unless I have a lot of token effects or stealing effects, because these get very bad in multiples. You don't want to have to be staring down a decent board and have to use this. All right. Ghirapur Aether Grid, 2 colorless red. Tap 2 untapped artifacts you control. Ghirapur Aether Grid deals 1 damage to target creature player. Here's the problem with the card. You need to be running about 12 to 10 artifacts for this to be good, and you probably don't have that many artifacts. If you do, this is a very strong card, but most games you're just not going to have the reliability. I don't think it's constructed playable either, and I think in Limited this is a card that you're going to pick up in the second pack, usually on the this card probably just wheel around. Like if you have a decent amount of artifacts when it wheels, if you don't have anything better to pick, it might be decent, but you need a high density of artifacts to make it any good, right? Just activating this 1 per turn isn't even super powerful. You really want to get to the 4 artifact mark to make this a strong card. Now, what do we got here, Ash?
The Goblin Glory Chaser, 1 red. Renown 1, as long as Goblin Glory Chaser is renowned, it has Menace.
So we've got 1/1 for 1 with Renown 1, and it can have Menace, which means it has to be blocked by 2 more creatures. This might, but probably won't see playing constructed. There's better 2-power creatures for 1. And this looks attractive in an aggressive limited deck at first, right? Only 2 power for 1. It has to be blocked by 2 creatures. But the catch is, it's not good.
Because it's only going to ever last 1 turn if it's...
Not that much as much as, like, if you get it on turn 1, your best case scenario is a 2/2 that will be blocked by 2 creatures, which doesn't even get the advantage of an Menace deck getting to kill more than 1 creature. And what happens if you draw late? You have a 1/1 for 1 that doesn't do anything. Like, it's not getting through. It's just not strong enough. I would rather this cost another mana and have another power and toughness. That would be an exciting card, but as a 1 for 1, it's just not there. So let's tell us, give me your insight on the next card here.
It's Magmatic Insight, 1 red. Just a sorcery. As an additional cost, cast Magmatic Insight, discard a land card, draw 2 cards.
How do you feel about that? Do you want to play this in your deck?
I'm a little confused about, it says as an additional card.
As an additional cost. So you have to pay red and discard a land to cast this.
Okay.
And then you draw 2 cards.
I don't play a lot of red mono decks, so I'm not sure if this would be good. I am definitely on the not a first pick, though.
Yeah, I wouldn't pick this early. For limited, this card I think is decently strong. It's not as powerful as the other drawing options, but sometimes you're not in black or blue, so you don't have drawing card options. And this is decent. Often late in the game, you can pay the single red and discard your extra land, and you draw the 2 cards. And the fact that you only played a single red means that you can use the rest of your mana effectively, right? Like if it's turn 6, you pay your red, you discard a land, you draw 2 cards. You can probably, one of them might be a land, and you can play your 6 casting card up 2, or there might be 2 smaller spells, but you're likely to be able to play it. It's strong there. I think in standard, this also might see some play, just being so cheap, and lands, especially in aggressive decks, being so non-consequential. A decent limited card that I will put into a strong amount of decks. There is a cost to it. You're not really getting any extra cards. You're spending 2 cards to get 2 cards, but you're getting good card selection, which is solid for red. All right, Ash, you want to tell us about this next one over here?
The Ravaging Blaze, X amount colorless, 2 red. It is an instant. Ravaging Blaze deals X damage to target creature. Spell Mastery. If there are 2 more instant and or sorcery cards in your graveyard, Ravaging Blaze also does X damage to that creature's controller.
This card's a first pick. X variable amount of damage spells are always very, very high. The fact that it can early game kill any creatures, and it's an instant, which is especially important. So if they try to do anything tricky, you can kill it in response. Late in the game, you'll almost always have 2 cards in your graveyard, especially in red, and you can just kill your opponent. They can have a 1/1, and you can do 10 damage to it, and it'll do that. Now, important to remember here, this only has 1 target. So if your opponent kills their creature or sacrifices their creature in response, you will not get to deal the damage to your opponent. I still think it's easily a first pick. This also may see some play in standard, but I don't think it's quite strong enough with that double red. Seismic Elemental, 3 colorless, red, for a 4/4. I'm happy to play that card. I'm already on board. It's not a high pick, but it's solid. When it enters the battlefield, creatures without flying can't block this turn. Okay, now I'm interested. Now this is the kind of card I'm looking to pick early. I think this is better than a lot of other cards. It goes solid into your early red decks. It goes solid into your late red decks. Really, if you can run it in any of your limited decks, you're looking to pick it up pretty highly. It's not great in a lot, multiple-wise, but having 2 in your deck would be super solid, and at uncommon, you probably won't get more than that. I don't think it's constructed playable. All right. You want to tell us about the giant?
It is a giant. It is a Skyraker giant for 2 colors, 2 red, for a 4/3. It does have reach, and those are other words that are not important.
Yeah, it can block creatures with flying, so it's just a 4 mana 4/3 with reach. How do you feel about that? So think about
I'm a little disappointed with the low toughness, I guess. I mean, it's got a really high attack, but usually when I have a creature like that has reach, I'm usually using it to just block flyers, but you know, if he's got some flyers that have a lot of counters on them or something, you know, it doesn't even really do you any good.
I really like this card here. It's an uncommon 4/3 that's a strong rate for red, and most of the flyers in the set are Thopters, so they're 1/1s. So
Okay.
This can kill your 1/1s well. It can hold back if you need it to. Most of the time, you're just smashing face for a 4 mana 4/3. Like, solid red cards, been great. The reach is more important than you'd think with the amount of Thopter cards you're going to see in blue and red. But that's really the reason the reach is there, is just to kind of be a way for red to stem the bleeding against these Thopter decks. One other way you can stem the bleeding is the Thopter Engineer. 2 colorless red for 1/3. When it enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature on the battlefield. Artifact creature, you have haste. This is essentially a 2/4 across 2 bodies for 3 mana. That's amazing. One of it has flying, and it can hit immediately, so your opponent's usually taking 1 right off the bat. If you have other Thopters, it's coming out too. I think this is one of the premier cards in the Thopter deck. I think it's one of the main reasons to go kind of push your Thopter theme if you see one of these willing around, right? I mean, obviously, your rares, your Pia and Kanara are your super great, right? But you're not always going to get the rares, and cards like Thopter Engineer are going to be the baseline to a solid deck that can play defense on the ground with your 1/3 and attack here. I think this is one of the better uncommons overall. I'm excited about it. I think it's better than the Skyraker Giant. It's hard to say if the Seismic Elemental or the Thopter Engineer is more powerful overall. This card doesn't have a higher power overall, but this costing 3 is a lot more exciting. I think the only uncommon I'd probably pick over that is the Ravaging Blaze, which is probably going to be the best uncommon in the whole set. All right, Volcanic Rumbler, rumbling right along.
Rambler.
Rambler, go ahead and tell us about it.
5 colorless and a red. And then you also have to pay an additional 2 colorless and red just to deal 1 damage to target player, but it has 4 toughness and 6 attack. So
right.
It's good for that, but I feel like the cost to deal 1 damage extra is kind of ludicrous, but I don't think that's what you're going to be using this for.
Right, and just like Ash was saying, me and Brad were talking about it yesterday, don't get caught up in text that's not important. 6 for a 6/4 is the going rate on a red card for that. That's solid. It's not amazing. It's not super impressive. But if you didn't have other big cards, you'd be happy to run it. And the fact that you can pay 3 colors to deal 1 damage to target player is not great, but it's fine. It's all upside.
Yeah, if you get stuck in a tough spot and you have a lot of mana but nothing to do, it's something to do.
Often, this will be the last card out of your hand. And if you draw a land, you're looking at, even if you don't draw a land, pay 6 mana, deal 2 damage, which is fine. You did 2 free damage just because. Your 6/4 is getting there. There can be board situations where your opponent can't attack, and you can just kill them 1 or 2 damage at a time. The ability doesn't have to be great if it's on a fine body. I don't think it's an early pick, but I think it'll be a card you'll often play in your decks if you don't have a better red finisher. Active Treason. Can you tell us about this card, Ash?
For 2 colorless, 1 red, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. I usually really like this card whenever I do black and red or black and blue, but in this case I don't, because I like to sacrifice it before they get it back, but I don't see a whole lot of those cards, so I probably would not pick it.
There is an anti-Glusk. I wouldn't take Active Treason early. If you are in the aggressive red deck, it's a fine card. You don't even have to play it main board. Sometimes it'll come in your sideboard against the really aggressive decks. I usually only want 1 in my sideboard to bring in certain matches. You could do up to 2, but it can be powerful if utilized right. This set doesn't have the sacrifice major themes to make it very powerful, but a card to be wary of and a card to be mindful of. Alright. A Crowan Sergeant. 3 colorless red for a 2/2 first strike. I'm already sold. That's a good enough card for me for most of the time, especially at common. Renown 1. This is a strong card because you can play it on turn 3. And on turn 4, they probably don't have a good enough card to trade with this. And if it gets through, you have a 3/3 first strike. Very powerful early in the game. I think this is the kind of card that if you're seeing 5th or 6th pick, you should think about being in red. It's a flexible card for the most part. It does good defense and it does good offense. Right after you've hit the first time, you can hold back with 1 and have 3 power of first strike, which holds back a large amount of cards outside of green. All right, Ash, you tell us about the next card.
The Bellows Lizard for 1 red. Paid additional. Is that a colorless and a red?
Mm-hmm.
To get a 1/0 just until the end of your turn for a 1/1. I'm not very sold on this because I've seen a lot of other cards that can generate tokens for a little bit more, but I feel like they are a lot more cost efficient.
Yep, that's a big point that Ash is putting out. There's a lot of 1 toughness creatures that would take this down, and even if it was better, because I don't think this card's playable even if it weren't tokens, the tokens would push it further out. I think this card's unplayable, and you shouldn't look to be playing it at all. Bogart Brute, on the other hand, is 2 colorless red for a 3/2 menace. It has to be blocked by 2 creatures. This is a fine card. It's above average. You're not going to pick it super early, but it's going to make most of your red decks. And the nice part about Menace is your opponent has to block with 2 creatures. I mean, how often do you have 2 throwaway creatures when you're playing Magic, Ash?
Not unless I've got a lot of tokens, or a lot of Thopters, I guess, in this case.
So you're usually having to block with a creature that you'd rather not die, and you don't have that option. Usually this card's going to get and it's up to you to assign the damage, so you get to choose which of their creatures is going to die. And if you have combat tricks to make it bigger or anything like that, it can go a long way. All right, here we go. Chandra's Fury. 4 colorless red. It deals 4 damage to target player and 1 damage to each creature that player controls. I don't think you're only going to play this in your main deck. If you're very aggressive, you may want one to deal the last 4 to something, but these 2 abilities are usually at opposite ends, and being able to pull it out of your sideboard and pull it in when you need to play against that deck that has a bunch of Bellow Lizards and Thopters, right? It kills all the Thopters and that kind of stuff is powerful. Or in your red deck that your opponent just has a lot of big ground creatures and they gum up the board at the end, so you can kind of get through that last little bit of damage. Can you tell us about this next card?
He's a Cobble Brute for 3 colorless, 1 red, and for 5/2. A lot of attack, but not much toughness. I'm pretty on the fence about this. I wouldn't know what to do with this.
Your opponent can often trade their cheaper cards for it. A lot of creatures have 2 power. The trick with a Cobble Brute is that it goes very well into these aggressive red decks for attacking, where you're keeping your opponent off by having strong creatures they had to block, having cards to kill their stuff, having tricks to get him through. But also, interestingly, Cobble Brute does obviously go in the aggressive deck. He goes into the defensive deck well. Turn 4, you play their 5/2. If you had other small creatures or other creatures with a lot of toughness to block, their 5/2 can kill most of their creatures, right? I mean, did we see any creatures with 5 toughness? I don't think we saw any. This creature, if it gets in tussles with anybody, kills everybody, right? Kills this rare up here, everything. And it's going to kill probably almost every single creature outside of maybe 1 or 2 black or green creatures in the whole set. So it can trade with anything that wants to attack as well. Alright, Demolish 3 colorless red, destroy target artifact or land. That card's not playable, and you're not normally going to pull it in from your sideboard unless your opponent just has some sort of sick artifact that wouldn't pull it in against a Thopter deck. It's just not good enough to pay 4 to kill a 1/1. Alright, and you can tell us about the fodder?
Dragon Fodder. 1 colorless, 1 red, put 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens on the battlefield. Wouldn't be a first pick, but I would probably definitely pick it at some point. Because it...
Yep. 2 1/1s, 2 power and toughness across 2 bodies for 2 mana is perfectly serviceable. It's fine in aggressive decks, it's fine in defensive decks. Not super all-star, but just middle of the road. Alright, but speaking of all-stars, this card may see some standard play. Not totally sure yet. Depends on how much you want to get rid of creatures out of the way, and the 3 damage matters. My suspicion is that it won't make it over the other shock variants. But in limited, this is the kind of card you can first pick. Red for 2 damage to target creature. Sold! I'm already playing that card. 100%. Spell Mastery. It deals 3. So early game, it's going to kill anything. Late game, it's going to kill a lot of the creatures that are making their way around. Most of the flyers, most of the evasive creatures, and just for 1 mana. And at common, you can easily get probably 2 of these. People can pick them up pretty early. If you're seeing these late, snatch them up. This is a card I'd be happy to run as many as I could get. Often it can just kill creatures outright, and actually creatures that can't kill outright, you can just put it with another card, like a Bogart Brute right there, to deal the necessary amount of damage to kill 2 cards. Alright, Fire Fiend Elemental. 3 colorless red for a 3/2. Haste, Renown 1. Your opponent's often going to tap out, and the fact that this swings in for 3 and then becomes a 4/3 for 4 is awesome. I think this is one of the better rare commons, outside of a couple examples like Fire Impulse. You don't want to run a ton of these, obviously. You only have so many 4-drop slots, but I'd be happy to commit 2 of these, or maybe even 3 to my deck. So you got our Gearcrafter over here.
For 2 colorless and a red.
You have the Gihapur Gearcrafter.
Gearhapur. When he enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 colorless Thopter token with flying onto the battlefield.
So the total stats are a 3/2 for 3, and half of it has flying. I think that's solid. This is going to be the baseline for your good Thopter decks, or your combined kind of aggro air, aggro body red decks. Red's looking really good in that department. You can put a lot of pressure on. You can use him to trade a creature, kill one of your opponent's creatures while keeping your Thopter. I think this is going to be the backbone of the Thopter decks you're seeing and other aggressive red decks. Alright, so here's a cool one. We were talking about the multi-card cycle. Infectious Bloodlust, I think, is the most interesting one. At colorless red, Enchanted Creature. Enchanted Creature gets +2/+1 and has haste and attacks each turn of Fable. That's fine. It's not super exciting on its own. When Enchanted Creature dies, you may search your library for a card named Infectious Bloodlust, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So let me set up a pretty easy scenario. You play a 2-drop. You pass. You play a 3-drop. You pass. You play another 2-drop on turn 4. You put an Infectious Bloodlust on it. You swing with your team. Your opponent needs to block. That's a lot of bodies. You probably played a 2/2. Or 2-power creature, so now you're swinging with a 4/3 or a 4/2 or a 4/3, 4/5, whatever you're swinging with. That's a lot of damage being represented. Your opponent needs to kill that creature. They can't afford to let you sit around with a 4-power creature. You get another Infectious Bloodlust. You're ready to do the same next turn. One of the big downsides to auras is the losing a card. If you have 2 or 3 of these, you're not losing cards. Your opponent has to kill several cards in a row just to get you out of the point where you're kind of just getting this repeated power, repeated haste. You can put it on your opponent's creatures if you really need to get blockers out of the way next turn. It's kind of slow. I usually put on my own. But we saw Blightcaster in black, right, really taking advantage of this kind of stuff. And the white theme, this is one of the stronger cards and more interesting cards we've seen in a long time. There's a small chance we may see some sort of standard play in this, depending on how it goes. I don't think so, just because of the cost being so high. But as far as limited goes, I think it's one of the coolest cards we've seen, and the power's definitely up there. I wouldn't probably run more than 3, but I do think 3 is really sweet right there. Ash, you want to tell us about the next card?
The Lightning Javelin. 3 colorless, 1 red. Deals 3 damage to target creature or a player, and then you scry 1, put it on the top or the bottom of your library. I would not pay this much for this.
It's a sorcery. This is non-premium removal. You'll play it when you have to, and you often will. I can see you playing one of these often in your decks. It's fine to deal the 3. The scry one's gonna help a little bit, but Ash says you'd rather not play it. You probably will play it. Pick it kind of later. Removal is removal. So we saw here, I think it kills just about every creature we saw as well. So it's not that it's terrible, it's just overcosted, right? We saw for 1 mana you can potentially deal 3 damage as well at instant speed. Mage Ring Bully, 2 mana for a 2/2, attacks each turn it's able and has prowess. I think it's solid, 2 mana 2/2 prowess. Your opponent's usually going to block this card because they know it has to attack every turn. If you have some amount of spells, it can be okay. I'm only going to usually play this in very aggressive decks where I'm okay with it dying. So not normally too terribly excited about this. Remember to play your sorceries like Dragon Fodder during your first main phase. If you're doing this and your opponent has blocks out that could trade with it. Not a high pick, but not the worst. Prickle Boar is one of the more interesting cards. 5 for a 3/4, so 4 colors red. As long as it, sorry, 3/3.
3/3.
As long as it's your turn, it gets +2 power and first strike. So when it attacks, it's a 5/3 first strike. That's awesome. On defense, it lacks some, but I don't think it's terrible. I think I'd be happy to actually have this as my 5-drop. Not many cards can get through a 5-power creature with first strike. All right, Ash, you gonna tell us about the next card?
I'm gonna smash it with a hammer. Smash it to smithereens. 1 colorless, 1 red. Instant, which is nice. Destroy target artifact. Smash to smithereen does 3 damage to that artifact's controller. I guess this cliche term removal is nice, but it only works on artifacts, and I haven't seen a whole lot of artifacts in this deck, so.
Oh, we've seen a ton. All these little red cards that make the Thopters.
Oh, the Thopters are artifacts.
They
My
are.
bad.
But the thing about it is, I don't think I want this in my deck to kill Thopters. 2 damage to kill a Thopter, deal 3 damage to target player is not normally what you're going to want to play. If your opponent has, you're normally not going to sideboard these in. Like there'll be weird situations your opponent's playing the Super Thopter deck and you have several of them because they're going to go around. Like constructed wise, this may see some play. There's a couple artifacts that pop in and out. And it's a strong sideboard card. We'll see if the flexibility to destroy artifacts or enchantments kind of reigns over that. But in the mono red decks, if there's something they need to deal with, like a whip, it can be there. Alright, last 2 in red. Subterranean Scout is 1 colorless red for 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, target creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn. Amazing. I'm happy with the 2/1 for 2. Most of the time, I'll have to play it on turn 2 without using the ability, and later in the game, it's going to get you 2 damage through free. I think this is one of the more solid red cards. If you're seeing these go around a little bit later than they should, probably 5th or 6th pick, it's a reason to be in red. I don't mind having these in multiples and that they work with each other, and I'm happy to have a lot of early creatures. Titan Strength. Target creature gets +1/+3 until end of turn, scry 1.
+3/+1.
Yep.
You said +1/+3.
Oh, okay. The fact that it only gives 1 toughness is actually kind of an issue. It doesn't normally save your creature. The fact that it only costs 1 mana is solid, but this is actually not the kind of power thing I'm usually looking to do often. If you have a lot of prowess, it's a little bit better. Obviously, I wouldn't mind playing it, but I don't think we really saw any better red tricks. That said, I think red is a very powerful color. Let's go on to green and then multicolor, and we'll wrap up. All right, so we talked about Nissa. Now, Woodland Bellower is 4 colors, green, red, green for a 6/5. When Woodland Bellower enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a non-legendary green creature with converted mana cost 3. or less and put it into play. Then shuffle your library. This is a constructed all-star. There's talk of this seeing some modern play. I definitely see standard play. It pulls out lots of creatures. Now, it doesn't pull legends, but you can pull out things like your 4/4s with your Savage Knuckleblade, right? Just getting 10 power, 9 toughness, and abilities. You can draw cards if you pull up the smaller creatures. There's a lot. You can kill artifacts, enchantments in standard. We'll be seeing a ton of standard play from this big bear boy, and we may be seeing him in modern, depending if the combo pieces line up as maybe a 1 or a 2 of. You don't have to play a ton of these to take advantage of them as well. In standard, this is an easy first pick. You get 2 bodies, and they are both giant. You get your best 3 or less card, and you get this guy, which is probably one of the best cards in your deck as well. All right, the Great Aurora. 6 colorless, or green, green, green. Each player shuffles all cards from his or her hand and all permanents he or she's into the library, then draws that many cards. Each player puts any number of land cards from his or her hand into the battlefield. Exile the Great Aurora. This is a combo card. This is, first of all, not playable in Limited because it costs 9. Don't play 9 costing cards in Limited. You will not do well. You're not going to get that much mana usually. You're running like 16 to 18 lands in your whole deck. That's over half the lands in your deck, so don't play this in Limited. In Constructed, we will see if there is a deck that can take advantage of it. It'll be a combo deck, or it won't be. So you'll see it or not. I don't think it'll happen at 9 mana. Animist's Awakening. X green. Reveal the top X cards of your library. Put all lands from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest of the bottom of your library in any order. Spell Mastery. Untap those lands. Another card that is not particularly playable in Limited. You don't need extra lands. This is some sort of land combo deck that's going on. It may see play in Modern or Standard, depending on the land decks we see or these combo decks. These are cards like the Great Aurora and Animist's Awakening are kind of hard to put your finger on because they may or may not have archetypes that exist. They may have archetypes that pop up because of them. We'll see. It's always fun to play with them. You can look at players like Travis Wu to see kind of what's brewing around, and Caleb Durwood. All right, Ash, why don't you tell us about Dwynn, Giltleaf Dayan.
2 colors, 2 green. It's a legendary. It has reach. Other elf creatures you control gain +1/+1 whenever she attacks. You gain 1 life for each attacking elf you control. If I was in Limited, I'd probably go ahead and pick this first because I'd probably be picking more elves.
It is one of the cards to go into elves for because your other elves do get bigger. It's a 3/4 for 4, which is fine. That's not a card I'd first pick on its own, but the fact that it gives +1/+1 to the other elves is powerful. The fact that it has reach and can block those Thopters to keep you ahead is powerful. And the fact that it gains you life means you can race. This is actually extremely relevant text on each part of this card. But even if you don't have elves, it's a fine pick. If in the second pack I saw this, or it'll say the third pack and I didn't really have any elves in green, I don't know if I would pick this super highly, but the fact is it's going to be one of the best 4-drops in the whole set as well. It's just a 3/4. Standard-wise, it's not playable in Modern because we have the 3 mana lords. In Standard, we may see it if there's another lord at 3 or 2 as the high-end lord. None of the abilities are particularly relevant. The life gain can help, and the +1 can help, but that's edge. But yeah, Limited, it's very solid, and one of the reasons you can go into this to kind of sculpt your elf deck. Evolutionary Leap. Colorless, green, green. Sacrifice a creature. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card in your hand, the rest on the bottom, in any order. In Limited, I'm not normally playing this card. It's a lot of a dice roll. If I had a lot of creatures with Enter the Battlefield effects, like with that red card we saw the double, I could look at it. But I'm not going to pick this early. There's too many uncontrolled variables, and the fact that I have to sacrifice a creature that's in play to get a creature in my hand means that it's all pretty weak tempo play. In Standard, this may see Modern or Standard play in some sort of combo deck, but the fact that it goes into your hand and you don't know what it is makes it a little trickier. It is a variation of I forgot the card. It's banned, but it's based off of a strong card. Not sure if it's going to quite make it. Can you tell us about the next card?
Gaia's
Revenge.
Gaia's Revenge. 5 colorless and 2 green. Cannot be countered. That's like when, like a blue spell or whatever, it's like, no, you can't summon this creature, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Also has haste, And he cannot be the target of non-green spells or abilities from non-green sources, and it's for an 8/5. I'm really sold.
It's a powerful card. You need to be aware, this card costs 7. It takes a long time to get there. It has 5 toughness. It is killable.
It's late game, but it's probably going to be what ends up killing them.
It can be blocked by other creatures, so they won't, they're going to have to kill us in combat. They can't use black spells or red spells to kill it. But they can block with small creatures over and over. This is a strong card. The lack of trample makes me less excited about it, but it is a card I would will of playing. I would not pick this card highly because it's just a big, strong, dumb creature, and there's plenty of those, right? I mean, Woodland Bellow obviously is one of the best cards there because it gets us 2, but is a 6/5 and an 8/5 really that different? Not normally. What sets us apart is the haste and the not being able to be killed by most cards that kill things in the set. But this gets me another card, so this is 2 cards. And it costs a mana less, which represents about a 2.5 to 3 turns for that mana level. Don't be afraid to pick this card. This isn't the card you want to go into green for, but this is the kind of card that will help you win once you're in green. Herald of the Pantheon. Constructed-wise, this actually can see constructed play. Often in the green decks, a card like this where they don't have creatures, it's going to perform much better. You can, in your big green decks, focus down, and your opponent can't kill it with any spells other than wrath effects, and they often don't have the creatures to kind of get past this. So they can't counter it, they can't target and kill it, and it's barreling down 8 damage at them. I think it's actually a lot stronger and constructed than a lot of people think about it. Herald of the Pantheon. Colorless green for 2/2. Hey, you know what? I'm okay with that. That's already a good card. Enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 1 life. So if you didn't have any enchantment spells in your deck, would you play this card?
I still would consider it just because it's something to put down that's a cheap cost. It could be an early play for block.
Exactly. That's exactly what we're talking about. This text isn't particularly important outside of that. Now, there is green and black both have strong enchantments. And, I'm sorry, black and white both have strong enchantments. That's a pretty solid effect. It's not an early pick for me. I'm not going to build an enchantment deck around it. But I'm happy to run my 2/2 for 2. And the fact that it can make my enchantments cost 1 less, awesome. The fact that I can gain life, also good. Yeah, Sam, man, I was thinking of Survival of the Fittest. The problem is Survival of the Fittest lets you control what card you want, and you discarded a card. So you didn't have to pay for the card to go into play. Evolutionary Leap is much, much less powerful than Survival of the Fittest, but Survival of the Fittest was a banned, broken card. So if this deck card is even remotely as strong as it, you are correct in that it can be very powerful. I don't think having to sacrifice creatures from the board to get random creatures in your hand is going to be good enough, but maybe if there's some way you can translate in-card or in-hand resources through a discard outlet or into the battle temporary outlet, that it could be good enough. We'll see. My inclination is no, but we'll have to go from there. I do think that in in limited, you're not going to want to sacrifice your onboard creature to that. Usually, if you're in spots where your opponent has a lot of removal, you might bring it in from the board. But usually, you're just happy to trade your creatures off for theirs. All right, Honored Hierarch. Green for a 1/1 renown 1. As long as Honored Hierarch is renowned, it has vigilance and add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. I don't think this is playable in limited just because it's so hard to get through a 1/1, even if it does end up tapping for mana the next turn, just because how weak it is later. In standard, this may see some play, but I also am just leaning to the fact that it's just worse overall than other mana elves. I just don't think it's really going to make it in any format. All right, Ash, you want to tell us about this Hydra?
The Mana Gorger Hydra. 2 colorless, 1 green. Trample. And whenever a player casts a spell, you get a +1/+1 counter on a 1/1. Yeah, I think I'd play this just because you're having to get spells from both sides, which is a little bit more, I think, advantageous than the Centaur Shaman, who only gets benefits when you're casting spells.
Yep. First of all, I don't think this card is constructed playable. Your opponent's usually going to kill it before it makes decisions. But in limited, Ash is exactly right. It puts out a lot of pressure. If you play this early, it's going to get big fast. I mean, your opponent's usually playing a spell every turn until already late game. It's not quite as interesting, but the fact that your opponent's going to have to kill this creature because it's going to grow over time is quite nice. I will say, late in the game, if you need this as a defense, it's not a good defensive card. If your opponent has an established board and they're attacking it, you're not doing so hot there. When you're winning, it's okay. It's going to help you push through a little quicker. But it's good at the beginning of the game, when it's still developing, and it's good if the game is stalled out. And those board positions come up pretty often. I'm not sure if I'm wanting to commit to it early, just because it does take about 2 turns, right? I mean, your opponent probably casts a spell, and then you probably cast a spell. Not asking that much for it to probably be a 3/3 that grows, but not sure if this is going to be always my first pick. I'm probably going to pick this over most other uncommons and commons, but I think I'd pick a solid removal spell over it. Alright, Nissa's Revelation. 5 green, scry 5, then reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, you draw cards equal to its power, and gain life equal to its toughness. I think this card costs too much for
not being able to put something on the field immediately.
It doesn't affect the board. For standard, it may come out of sideboards occasionally as a one-of in the green decks because it can draw you quite a few cards. In limited, I wish I could say I want to run this, but I don't want my 7-mana card to just draw me cards and gain me life. I want it to win me the game. And this card will help you win the game. If this card comes around, this card can be your finishing card. The problem is, like, I just want something that's more impactful at 7 mana, and it's just not quite there. You will always get a card, right? You always get that creature and probably several other creatures. You're probably looking at 3 life and 3 creatures on average, which I don't even think is enough for 7, really. I mean, how many creatures do you have with more than 5 or 4 power? And it's not normally that many. You're getting a look at probably a 10th of your deck, but they're probably more than that. It's probably like a 5th of your deck, but you don't probably even have that many big creatures to justify it. Now, what about this guy right here, Ash?
He's a big guy. He's the Outland Colossus, 3 uncolored, 2 green. He has a renown of 6, so how is that different than
1? He gets 6 counters.
Okay, 6 1+1 counters. Okay, there we go. And he cannot be blocked by more than 1 creature.
And he's a 6/6.
I hope that red-blue deck has a 6/6 to block him with.
He'll usually just win over and over. Your opponent has to block him over and over. 5 for 6/6. I don't think this is going to see constructed play. He doesn't have trample. But your opponent can't block with more than 1 creature, so they can't normally get off the board with creatures or combat. They don't really have enough big creatures. And if it ever hits your opponent, it is a 12/12, so it's literally unkillable by creatures for the most part. That said, without any other evasion, it's not normally just going to be getting through, but it's big enough that you can just attack and attack and attack. And, you know, with the Thopters and other things, it may always be blocked. Don't think about this always winning you. There, yeah, in Standard, we do have the Temur Battle Rage. You can get through. The Double Strike's interesting because it deals 6, and then it deals 11. Or 12, sorry. It does 6 and then 12. So it does 18 damage all by itself, which is kind of cool 2-card combo. Because the Renown triggers after the first strike, and you get the counters, and then it does the double strike damage, which is cool. And it has trample. But I think other than that cute combo, it's just not there. This is one of the rares that I would like to be in green for, though, right? Costing 5 is so much less. 5, I think it's probably... I'd take the Woodland Bellower for the 2 cards over it. But I think other than Woodland Bellower, I think this is the card I'm most excited about in green.
Yeah, this is the kind of guy that I like to draw and hole up behind while he kills all my opponent's creatures, and I'd sit there and laugh.
Yeah, you can attack every turn. All right, what do we got next?
The Conclave Naturalists, 4 uncolored, 1 green. When they enter the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment, and it is a 4/4. For the mana cost, I guess it's okay, but since we're going to be playing out of a green deck, there's going to be some bigger creatures anyway. I'm pretty in the middle about this. I'm not really excited about it because... But then again, if I'm thinking about the Thopters from that red deck, I'd consider it as removal for that.
It'll kill the Thopters and other enchantments. We saw the black and white enchantments that are powerful. I think this card's solid. I'd be happy to run my main deck because a 4/4 is fairly large on its own for 5. You don't normally see 4-power creatures, and it has an ability that's decently going to be relevant, right? I mean, looking at the 6 for rare is a pretty unfair comparison, but usually, yeah, it's just coming right along here as the solid 4/4 for 5 a card I'm decently happy to play. An ability that's going to be more relevant than normally was. I think in Standard you may see some sideboard play out of this. I think that our 2/1 for 2 that does this effect for 3 mana we played more often, especially with this Woodland Bellower coming out. I think this is one of the key cards in Standard we're going to see the format warp around. But yeah, Conclave Naturalist is a card to pick up. I mean, it's not going to put me in the green, but if you've seen these late, it's a good sign. If all my 5 drops were Conclave Naturalists, I'd be in an okay spot. All right, Ash, what do we got here?
The Dwyan.
Dwyan's Elite.
Yep, 1 colorless, 1 green. When they enter the battlefield, if you control another elf, you put a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token on the battlefield, and the initial one is 2/2. Not a first pick, but if I'd picked any other elves, I'd pick it.
Yeah, you can just pick it without any other elves. The fact that it's a 2/2 for 2 is a fine card. You're going to run that. And it has an upside of getting you one of the 1/1. These cards are going to be, just filling out your deck in general. It's exciting in the elf deck. It's a much higher pick than once you're in the elf deck. I would take these moderately high because you'll see a lot of things that care about the number of elves you have. If there's an elf deck in Constructed and Standard, this will be played in it. Like, all the elf cards are, is there an elf deck? Yes, no, that's where it goes. So, yeah. All right. Elemental Bond. 2 colorless green. Whenever a creature with 3 or more power enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This card is not the kind of card you're normally going to play in Limited, because if you have a bunch of cards with 3 or more power, you're probably already winning the game. I don't mind running 1 if the deck turns out that way, but I'm not going to pick this early and build a deck around it so much as if I have a deck that has a lot of strong creatures, usually primarily green or green-red, then I can see myself running one of these. But you don't want multiple of these laying around not doing anything. In Standard, it can combo with the Temur Syndice to create a deck that just draws a lot of cards, or maybe other colors. Cards like this usually come out of the sideboard. I can control decks where you don't need as much pressure and you need more card advantage. But yeah, not an early pick in Limited. Gather the pack, colorless green, reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a creature card from among them into your hand, put the rest in your graveyard. If there are 2 more, or spell mastery, you can put 2 creatures in instead of 1. I like this card. It's going to get you 1 card that you like, or it's going to get you 2 cards, and might be played and constructed depending on the spots. But let's focus on the Limited part here. I'll be happy to run one of these, and that it's going to get me a good card late. You need to think of this as a later card, casting it on turn 6 or turn 7 to get your decent card that costs 4 and playing it. But the Spellmaster being able to get 2 cards, 2 creatures instead of 1 out of 5 is pretty likely. And the fact that it costs 2 is pretty strong as well. This is one of the few cards where the Spell Mastery makes a big difference. Usually Spell Mastery is not a big deal whether you have it or not, but this card's really going to push you towards wanting to have that Spell Mastery. So this is one of the ones where I want to make sure I have enough spells, which is only like 5 total spells to support it. Alright, Ash, you want to tell us about this next one?
Joraga.
Joraga
Invocation. 4 colors, 2 green. Each creature you control gets a +3/+3 until the end of the turn and must be blocked this turn if able. The first part sounds good. I'm actually not so sure what kind of situations the second one would put you into or get you out of.
So this is an Overrun type effect, and like Overrun, I expect you to win most games that you cast this. You play this card and you're probably killing most, if not all, of your opponent's board, and that's assuming that they live through the turn. This will be a first pickable card. It'll win you most of the games you played in, and it's just brutal. Turns your 1/1s into 4/4s to get to kill all their creatures, which are probably smaller than 4/4s. Turns your 6/6s into 10/10s. Sorry, 9/9s. Sorry, 9/9s. A little bit of difference there. Teeny. This is probably the most powerful Limited card we've seen, and we've seen a lot of other really powerful cards, but basically means you get to win the game that turn or next turn. Your opponent's rarely going to be able to win. The one exception is if your opponent has some amount of blockers and they have you dead the next turn to the creatures that are tapped. That's about it. So, next we have...
It's a spider.
Yeah.
Sky Snare Spider, blah, blah, blah. Sky Snare Spider. 4 colorless, 2 green. Vigilance. So, increases your tempo or reach. Great for getting rid of little flying things. And it's a 6/6. I would pick this.
I think this is one of the better creatures. I think I'd rather have Sky Snare Spider than Outland Colossus. It does more defense and offense. The fact that it's an uncommon is kind of crazy. Like, this card, well, Outland Colossus costs 5, so I'd probably pick the Outland Colossus over that. But if it costed 6, I would go the other way. So yeah, 6/6 for 6 with 2 very relevant abilities. It gums up the air, gums up the ground. It's going to get through. This is one of the strongest cards we've seen in green in a long time. This is really crazy that we actually get this much power and toughness for just 6 mana. You're not going to see these come around too often. This would be a card I'd be happy to first pick One of the better uncommons. Somberwald Alpha for 3 colors, green for 3/2. At the baseline, that's okay. Whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. That's an exciting card. That's an onboard effect. I can swing with my 2/2, my 3/3, and immediately they get 1 more power and toughness if somebody does something. Target creature you control gains trample until end of turn. So this is a card that really supports a lot of attacking. You can play it on turn 4 and get some benefit. You can play it on turn 6 and get quite a bit of benefit. It's an early play. It's a strong early play and a strong late play. It looks like it's mostly aggressive, but it'll be fine in a deck that's kind of stalling out as well, because if you're building up to that, your creatures are getting bigger. It makes it harder for them to make profitable blocks. And late in the game, it gives you that trample to push through the damage. So I'd be happy to have this anywhere. I'm not going to pick it super early, but I am going to be picking it probably within the first third or fourth. I'll be happy to have one of these in my deck. Subsequent ones aren't as powerful because you only need this effect once. All right, Ash, you want to tell us about
Sylvan Messenger, 3 colors for green. It's another elf. It has trample. And when it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put all elf cards revealed this way into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Not a first pick, but if I start getting elves, more elves.
So this is the kind of card that if I see first pick and I don't see any good removal, I'm probably going to pick this and see if elves is open. It's the kind of card that's going to net you 1 to 2 elves when you play it. It is an elf, and it has a relevant ability. This is the kind of card that also makes elves possible and constructed. You can get 2 or 3 elves super often. 2 elves is almost guaranteed if you build your elf deck in a strong way. With cards like Collective Company out as well, like you can really pile on the elves. It's just missing a 3-mana lord for elves to be very powerful. Sylvan Messenger is going to restock your hand and set up a sweet turn 5 when you play it, or even turn 4, right? Your elves can ramp out pretty easily. Much better in constructed than limited, but don't be afraid to, if you don't see a solid first pick, kind of make a speculative early pick on a Sylvan Messenger and see if the elves are open. This is the kind of card that's going to reward you heavily, getting you 1 to 3 cards off your elves. Undercity Troll, 2 for a 2/2. Hey, that's good. Renown 1. Oh, that's great. What else does it have? 3 colorless green, Regenerate Undercity Troll. The regeneration cost is expensive, but it's mostly gravy. And the fact that you can swing your 2/2 into their creatures later and hold up a trick or bluff a trick and see if your opponent lets you go for the round, they probably won't, but you can regenerate it if you didn't have anything better to do or to trade with a creature. So I think this is one of the stronger Renown cards. I'm not going to pick it super early, but I think it's one of the better 2-drops overall that we've seen, especially since it asks so little of you. Valeran Wardens, 2 colors green for 1/3. I'm kind of happy with that. Not an early pick, but a fine card. Renown 2. Okay, now we're talking. 3/5. Whenever a creature you control becomes renowned, draw a card. So they're not normally going to let this get through. If they can, you're already gaining a card. It's pushing your tempo in that you have a big creature and adding to the creature or total number of cards in your hand. So it's card advantage and strong tempo. You don't need any other renown cards for this to be great. But if you have other renown cards, this becomes superb. I think this is a card that is a higher pick. I think I would pick Valeran Wardens over a Sylvan Messenger or an Undercity Troll. It's just such a low floor. And by floor, remember, I mean the worst case scenario for this card is very good. The best case scenario for this card is pretty solid as well. So having that low or that high floor and a pretty high ceiling pushes it up to a kind of card I'd like to take early, especially out of my 3-drops. All right, what do we got next here, Ash?
Zendikar.
Yeah, Zendikar's Royal.
3 uncolored, 2 green. It's enchantment. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 2/2 green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. I'm pretty happy about that. I don't know if I'd build a deck around it limited, but I'm definitely would, if I saw it, I probably take it.
This is a card I'd be happy to build around deck unlimited. I play lands. That's all you got to do. You play it on turn 6. You play your land. You got a 2/2. Not amazing. Next turn, you got a 2/2. You got a 2/2. This is the kind of card I'm happy to first pick and kind of build this slow, controlling deck around, or it's going to grind out just me having enough turns to play it. At 5 mana, I can play it moderately, reliably. I'm always going to have more lands, and if I'm not drawing lands, I'm drawing spells. So it's rewarding you on both axes. It's making your land draws more effective. I would run max 2 of these in a deck, just because you don't want to have a bunch of 5-mana cards that don't do anything the turn they come out. But, it is a horror story if for some reason you have 2 of these out and are playing lands, because it's a lot of bodies. Aerial Volley, green, instant, deals 3 damage, divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures with flying. As far as constructed playability goes, I think Aerial Volley is the only constructed playable card, and that'll be a sideboard card. And in Limited, this is a sideboard card. This is an interesting way they've done it. It's powerful. It's one of the best cards we've seen like this, and I think it's specifically to deal with how dominant the Thopters will be. This can kill 3 Thopters. That's what it's mostly there for, but it'll help get rid of other flyer creatures. High sideboard pick. If I was in green, I would try to get my hands on at least 1, possibly 2 of these. It'll really wreck those Thopters days. Caustic Caterpillar, 1 for a 1/1. Pay 2, sacrifice it, destroy artifact and enchantment. We've seen these effects before. 1/1s for 1s just aren't strong enough, and the fact that you have to sacrifice it makes it even worse. Not a card you should be looking to play. Now, we do have a 1 power and toughness creature right here that I am excited to play, and we'll see constructed play, because it already does in other formats. Elvish Visionary. Colorless green. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. So, Ash, how do you feel about this card in your Limited deck?
Wouldn't probably say I wouldn't build around it, but I'm afraid that if I saw it and I didn't pick it, that it wouldn't be there when I came back.
Yeah.
But I mean, good early play.
Yeah, it draws you a card, and good late play. It's a speed bump. In your Elf deck, it's more powerful. In your other decks, it represents a creature to go to the graveyard. You know, it's going to be getting you to the later portion of the game, and often it is helping amass cards in your graveyard, or elves, or creatures in play, and all these other metrics that aren't normally that important, but with the draw card, it kind of all summons together pretty good. Hitchclaw Recluse, 2 colors green for 1/4 reach. It's a solid defensive card. I'd be happy to have 1 early. Not picking it early, but it'll really do a lot of work against those Thopter decks, and it allows you to build up towards a later game. Now remember, this isn't killing creatures, so it's going to let them go wider and wider. So you can't rely on cards like this just as your defense. All right, Ash, what do we got here next?
Leaf Glider. 1 colorless, 1 green. It is a elf creature. Tap to add 1 green mana to your mana pool. It is also 2/1. I'll take it.
It's a good card. You're playing on turn 2 in situations where you can be aggressive. It's going to let you... First of all, this may or may not, probably won't see play in the Elf deck and Constructed. I don't think it's particularly powerful, unlike Elvish Visionary, which is amazing. But the 2/1, in situations you can attack, you're just getting in damage. And in situations you can't, it's helping you ramp up cards that are more powerful. Llanowar Empath, 3 colors, green for 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, scry 2, then reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it into your hand. It's basically twice as strong, power and toughness wise, and twice the cost of Elvish Visionary, and it will usually be getting you a creature. Not 100% of the time, but a solid amount of time. Scry 2. Remember, you can scry 2, and if neither of them are creatures, you can put them both on the bottom, and you're still statistically likely to get a creature. Or you might have a non-creature spell you really want, or a land, right? So you don't always have to draw the card for it to be powerful, but usually it's going to net you that card. Solid pick. I'm not going to run too many of these in Limited too often, but I'll be happy to run 2 often. I don't think it's good enough for Constructed play. Mantle of Webs. Enchanted creature gets +3/+1 and has reach.
+1/+3.
Yeah, auras just don't have that kind of too much risk, not enough reward, so I'm not really going to be playing this card. Might of the Masses. This might actually see Constructed play depending on how the deck lines up. Green for target creature instant. Target creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control. In Limited, you might run one of these if you go real wide. It's just, you know, if you only have 1 creature, it's only +1/+1. That's not exciting. You have to already have a decent amount of creatures, which means you're probably already doing well. In Constructed, the token sets and the token decks will put this to better use. Nissa's Pilgrimage, 2 colors green. Search your library for up to 2 basic forest cards, reveal them, and put them one onto the battlefield tapped and the rest in your hand. Spell Mastery. Instead, you may search up for 3 basic forests instead of 2. Maybe in Constructed you have a deck that really wants to play a ton of lands and have a ton of resources, but probably not. In Limited, I'm also not really looking forward to getting a lot of lands just because it doesn't have a lot of effect on the board. If I'm a mostly green deck, I may be in a spot where I want to kind of get additional lands to ramp out. It is sort of a bad rampant growth effect. It doesn't fix your colors. Not particularly exciting, but you'll occasionally have a deck that can put use to it. What do we got here, Ash?
It's the Orchard Spirit, 2 uncolored, 1 green. Cannot be blocked except by creatures with flying or reach for a 2/2. Pretty happy with that.
Yeah, it's evasive. It's a 2/2 for 3. It's not necessarily the most exciting card, but you're usually going to run it. Green doesn't have much evasion, and that's some of the better evasion in the set. It cannot block creatures with flying. Make sure you remember that. But it's also knocked by affected by cards that say creatures with flying, like that Arrow Storm we talked about earlier. Farika's Disciple. 3 colorless green, Death Touch, Renown 1, 2/3. Okay, so this is usually going to get through. Your opponent's going to have to usually block with either a bigger or more expensive card. It'll kill both creatures if they have to double block, and once it becomes a 3/4 Death Touch, it's a force to be reckoned with. This is probably my favorite 4-drop as far as just being aggressive goes. It's just really getting in there. It's a good defensive and a good offensive card. Reclaim. Put target card from your graveyard on top of your library, green. Remember, you are losing a card to play this. This card costs you a draw. This is not normally a card you want to play. If you have a particular card that will absolutely win you the game if you play it more than once, maybe, but I'm not usually looking to play this at all. If I had powerful graveyard strategies, let me get it back. Still not really looking to put it back on top of my library. It's just not a very good effect. Rock Maulers. 4 colors, green for 4/4 trample. That's suitable. I'm happy with that. Renown 2. The fact that this says trample means this is probably going to trade with 2 cards or become a 6/6. If this becomes a 6/6, you're probably staring down a big muzzle to kind of fight through. A 6/6 trample is some real beef, especially the fact that it's attacking on turn 6 for that. Maybe even turn 5 you can accelerate it out. And then you've got a 6/6 staring at him. It's going to put him under a lot of pressure. One of the limited better 5-cost cards. All right, Ash, what do we got next?
The Timber Pack Wolf, 1 colors, 1 green. For a 2/2, gets 1/1 for each other creature you control, named Timber Pack Wolf. Not a first pick because the only way it's really going to be strong is if you have a bunch of other ones, but I guess it's okay as a 2 mana for 2/2.
It is, and in fact, if you get 2 of these, you're happy with them. You can both out. If you don't, that's fine too. I'm not going to warp my picks to get a lot of these. Like the red one, I think is very good. The red and the black one, I'm picking highly. But the green one is solid, but not exciting. Titanic Growth. 1 color green. Target creature gets ++4 until end of turn. It's an instant. A very solid combat trick. I'll run 1 to 2 of these in most of my decks. +4/+4 is significant damage to kill an opponent, and enough power and toughness that you will basically always win your trades. Or trade up so significantly that you took a card that didn't matter and did a ton of damage. Vastwood Gorger. 5 colors green for 5/6. Awesome. You're not normally going to want to run this card over some of the uncommons we saw. Right? I'd rather have my Rock Maulers than my Vastwood Gorger and all these other cards with a little bit more aggressive bents. But sometimes you won't get them. And sometimes that Vastwood Gorger will go right in that slot and you'll just be happy to have a lot of power and toughness that came around late. This card will be easy to come around. Alright, Vine Snare. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt by creatures with 4 or less power. That is most creatures. And the problem here is it doesn't prevent the damage that you want to when you're on the back end. This seems like a more aggressive bent card. You're not normally going to have a deck that can really take advantage of this reliably. This is more of a trap than anything else. I would prefer Fog to this usually. This isn't normally going to be you getting to kill your opponent's creatures, you know, when they attack in. This is usually going to be, man, I wish I had a Fog that I brought in from my sideboard. So this is a sideboard downgrade. Wild Instincts. Target creature you control gets +2/+2 until turn. It fights target creature an opponent controls. Now, we saw the other versions of this, the 1/1 counter for 4 and fought a creature. I think that card overall was better because the permanent counter represented a lot more potency over the long game. But the +2/+2 does allow your cards to trade more favorably quicker. So, Wild Instincts is the kind of card that I'm going to be looking to run 2 of usually. My green decks, it's good green removal. Your cards are big, your creatures are thick. You don't want to run too many at 4, and it's a sorcery, and if your card or creature dies or gets smaller, you don't get any benefit. You can just lose 2 cards for 1. But there's not that much instant speed removal. Yeva's Force Mage. When Yeva's Force Mage enters, 2 colors green for a 2/2. When Yeva's Force Mage enters the battlefield, target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. It's fine. Doesn't have any particular effects to capitalize on that, but usually lets you push through an extra amount of damage. Your creature gets big enough your opponent doesn't want to block it, that kind of stuff. Serviceable, but not necessarily particularly exciting. Alright, that wraps us up on green, which is going to take us over to artifacts.
What is this arbitrary order of things that you're deciding to stream to the populace?
Yesterday we did white, or a couple days ago we did white, blue, black. Today we did red, green, artifact, and multicolored. You missed out on the first part. Alright, Al-Hamarit's Archive. 5 colorless, legendary artifact. If you would gain life, you gain twice that much life instead. If you would draw a card, except for the first one you draw 2 instead. This card's totally not playable, because you normally don't want to play cards that gain you extra life and draw you more cards that you're already drawing for 5 mana. I don't think it's playable and constructed outside of some sort of weird combo deck, so we're just going to go ahead and pass on that. Pyromancer's Goggles, 5 colorless mana, legendary artifact. Tap to add red to your mana pool. Whenever mana is cast, to cast a red instant or sorcery, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for that copy. Another card that's not quite good enough for limited, you're not going to have that many red burn spells, which is usually what you're playing. Now this could be played in a standard deck with a lot of red kind of control cards and a lot of burn cards. It's exciting there. It copies the effects of it, spell mastery, and all that kind of stuff. So you could end up in a situation with this doing significant damage. We'll see if the deck comes around, but this would be a nice topper, maybe one of, and a burn deck. In limited, it's just not getting there. You don't have that many instant sorceries. You want to tell us about the next one, Ash?
Hangerback Walker for 2XX. How does that work?
If you pay 2 mana, it counts as 1 total for X. If you pay 4 mana, it counts for 2 total as X.
Well, I mean, it's got 2 X counters, though.
You have to pay the same amount for each X. So you either pay
1/1 or 2/2. You have to pay the same amount twice.
You'll be paying in even amounts. Yep.
Okay. Enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters on it. When it dies, put a 1/1 colorless Thropter artifact token with flying onto the battlefield for each 1/1 counter on Hangerback Walker. And then you can pay an additional 1 and tap to add a 1/1 counter onto the Walker. So, I usually don't ever play artifacts because I'm a noob still, but this seems like something that I would consider playing if I had a lot of mana to burn, because you can draw it with mana, then wait a turn, and then tap it and add more mana, it looks like.
No, it would need haste for that, but...
Oh, well, I mean, wait a turn. Like, once you can retap your mana is what I mean.
Oh, yeah,
retap your lands. So you can put a ton of stuff on it, and then if it dies, you've still got a ton of stuff to deal with.
Yep. This may see constructed play because it makes bodies, and it represents the threat by itself. But more importantly, in limited, you can play this on 2, and then activate it each turn to make it bigger and bigger and bigger as a potentially giant threat, especially with these Thopters coming on afterwards. And late in the game, it can be even more. Now, usually you will play this on 2 as a 1/1 and then pump it. At 4, it's okay as a 2/2. At 6, it's okay as a 3/3. It represents more bodies. You know, it does sink any amount of mana. I think this is one of the strongest cards we've seen, and it's a very high first pick. I'm always excited. I can't think of any card I would take over this card. It goes in any deck. Your aggressive decks will be able to make use of this ever-growing threat that turns into a bunch of 1/1s, and your defensive decks can do the same. Hell of the Gods, 1 colorless, equipment, equip 1. Equip creature gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control. In limited, you will almost never have enough enchantments to make this worth it. There'll be destruction-based enchantment, there'll be controlling-based enchantments on your opponent. Even when it's 2, right, just too many factors have to go in to make this good. I think in constructed, it's hard to have creatures and enchantments in the same deck. Maybe with the Theros block enchantment creatures, this could see play for a little bit, but I'm not particularly excited. We'll have to see kind of how the entire set pans out to see if there's enough to press through, but I don't think it's going to be doing too much in any formats. Mage Ring Responder, 7 for a 7/7. It doesn't untap during your untap step. Pay 7, untap it. When it attacks, it deals 7 damage to target creature defending player controls. So it's powerful. This is the kind of card I'm willing to play at the end of the game, or once I can pay for it and untap it every turn. It's holding it down. I'll be attacking every single turn. The fact that if for some reason you can untap it to block with it, if you have 14 mana, you probably won't. But more importantly, you can untap it at any point you like. It's going to kill a creature every time it attacks. It'll basically prevent your opponent from blocking favorably or staying ahead. It does cost 7 mana. It does require you to pay mana to untap it over and over, but It's putting the kind of pressure on your opponent to get rid of their stuff. I think this is a fairly high pick if you want a 7-mana card in your deck. I'd occasionally first pick it. You can build a deck around it that's really going to put a lot of pressure onto your opponent. Do you remember that it's an artifact and that people will have cards to kill artifacts out of the board? And so, this does just die to random artifact removal, and it kind of leaves you out of the luck. So be wary, but still very strong. Not playable in Standard. Orbs of Warding. 5 colors mana. You have hexproof. If a creature would deal 1 damage to you, if deal damage to you, prevent 1 damage of that. In Standard, this is unlikely to be playable. It might be out of the sideboard, but I think 5 mana for that artifact is just too much. If you're playing against a really, really thick Thopter deck, you might consider bringing this in out of the sideboard. It does prevent all damage from Thopters. Outside of that, I can't really see a position where I'd want to ever bring this in. You having hexproof doesn't do a lot against most people. Sword of the Animus. So this is the premier equipment in the set. 2 colors, 2 to equip. Equip creature gets +1/+1. Whenever it attacks, you search your library for a basic land, put it in the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. This will let you kind of get a lot of lands out, put pressure in this sort of aggressive deck. I'm not sure where the deck that wants it is, but in Limited, the fact that you are ramping out so quickly is strong. You only need 2 attacks for this to be worth it, which is not too unreasonable. And after about, if you do get 4 attacks through or something about, you are significantly reducing the amount of lands in your deck. Remember, you only have 16 to 18, so you could easily get in a position where you change your land to card ratio from the normal less 46-54 to something like 30, where you've put yourself in a position where lands no longer make up nearly half of your deck, which is powerful. I think it's going to be picked higher than you're ever going to see it. I don't think you're normally going to be playing it unless you have things to do with your mana. I wouldn't put this in a super aggressive deck. The 1 toughness and 1 power is not good enough. Angel's Tomb. 3 colors. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may have Angel's Tomb become a 3/3 white artifact creature with flying until end of turn. It's the kind of card that if you have a high amount of creatures, it can be strong. Not an early pick. Not really doing much here. With some of the black mass removal effects we saw, I'd be more excited because it survives through that, but overall I think this card is worse rather than better. It doesn't really block, and sometimes it doesn't even attack. Alright, Ash, you want to tell us about the next one?
A Brawler's Plate, 3 colors. Equipped creature gets a +2/+2 and has trample. And then you can equip it for an extra 4. Okay, so it has the additional equip cost of 4, so it's a total 7 mana that you're having to spend just to get a +2 and 2 in trample, but it's +2 and 2 in trample, so I really don't know how to feel about it.
I don't feel good about this. I gotta spend 4 mana to do this over and over. Your opponent's going to try to kill it the first time. They can easily, usually. And on subsequent turns, you're spending your whole turn to give +2/+2 in trample. That's usually okay, but if you look at equipment as the second or third time you pay, that means you usually are going to pay somewhere around 11 mana to get your first +2/+2 really on the board, really going, and that's not too exciting at all. Chief of the Foundry, 3 for a 2/3. Okay, I'm already happy with this uncommon. Other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. This is one of the premier cards that makes me want to get into the... Okay. This is going to get me into the Thopter decks. The fact that it's going to make my Thopters 2/2s of flying is going to put a lot of pressure out. I think it's one of the most powerful artifact-based cards in the entire set. And this is the kind of card that I'm going to start my Thopter decks with rather than finish, because a 2/3 for 3 is just fine on its own, even though there's not really that many artifacts outside of that. Goldforged Sentinel, 6 for 4/4 flying. Serviceable. This is your vanilla dragon. It can go in a lot of different decks. It can represent a lot of flying power and toughness. To be wary that your opponents are going to have more artifact destruction cards than normal, but it gets through a lot of damage. It represents a flyer in colors that normally get it. It's a mid to high pick in this set. We didn't see a lot of flying creatures with a lot of power and toughness. This holds back those. Jaymedae Tome, and it's 4 colors, 4 to draw a card. It's alright. This effect can be strong. You are spending a turn to draw a card. I'm going to keep it in the sideboard and bring it in out of my board to play against slower decks to kind of slowly kind of roll ahead. Prism Ring, 1 colorless. As it enters the battlefield, choose a color. Whenever you cast a spell of the chosen color, you gain 1 life. Don't play this card. Don't play this card ever. Don't play it in Constructed. Don't play it in Limit. You don't need this kind of effect. Gaining life does you nothing, really, when it's just that card by itself. If it had some sort of other text, we could look at it, but it does not. Meteorite, 5. When it enters the battlefield, deal 2 damage to target creature or player. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. This is a card I don't mind playing if I need to play it, if I don't have other cards to play. If I have mana fixing or ramping requirements above 5, it does usually pick off a small creature, but the combination of these effects is just less powerful. You'd rather have either of these effects at 2 or 3, and at 5 for both, you're just not getting what you want. It's a really bad 2 for 1, and not in the way you really can spell out any way to be significant. Ramroller, 3 colorless for a 2/3. It attacks each turn of Fable. That's solid, and if you control another artifact, it gets plus power, plus no toughness. Very strong. It's going to be pushing through quite a bit of damage, even if you don't have that many other artifacts. 2/3 for 2 is okay, but it threatens to add a lot more. And if it's inside of your artifact deck, all you do is play your Thopters, and now you've got a 5/3 your opponent has to get rid of. They can block with more than 1 creature, but if you have that extra 2 power, it's going to get rid of multiple creatures. So if you have just 2 or 3 other artifacts, I'd be happy to have Ramroller or 2. Ruined Servitor, 2/2 for 2. When it dies, each player draws a card. Serviceable card. Often can be very powerful if you're using it. Remember, you're kind of deciding when you want to play it, sculpting your deck in a way to take advantage of it. The draw card probably favors you slightly more than your opponent because you're deciding when. And you also can help build around your artifact themes or artifact care themes if you'd like as well. You don't need to pick these up early, they're going to come late. Sigil of Valor, 2 to equip, or sorry, 2 to play, 1 to equip. Whenever equipped creature attacks alone, it gets +1/+1 until for each other creature you control. So this comes at the cost of tempo quite a bit. So you attack with your ground creature, your opponent has to jump block it, they swing back with their other creatures or other effects or flying creatures. It's going to cost you quite a bit as far as tempo goes. The thing I like about this is it actually plays really nice with the Thopter decks because it makes so many small flying bodies and with evasive things. I think this is probably the best equipment in the set or Throwing Knife. It's hard to say which, but in the Thopter decks, this is actually a card I'm excited about to play. Being able to put this on one of your 1/1 Thopters and attack with just 1, if they have to use a removal spell on your 1/1 Thopter, you're usually gaining cards. Your opponent doesn't normally just get cards that kill 1/1 Thopters indiscriminately at instant speed for no cost. So they're having to spend cards to kill cards you didn't pay a card for, which is really where you want to be at. Throwing Knife, 2 colorless to play, 2 colors to equip. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. Not quite worse with the cost there. It's a bad Bone Splinter. Whenever equipped creature attacks, you may sacrifice the Throwing Knife. If you do, it deals 2 damage to target creature or player. And a bad shock. Both half of these make up a good card. Now, to be aware, you have to sacrifice it when it attacks. So it's not going to be able to kill their 4 toughness creature usually because they'll just not block with their 4 toughness creature. For your 2/2, right? You do 2 damage with the Throwing Knife and then 2 damage with your creature. Not going to work out that way. It will let you clear out certain creatures that are flying or prohibitive blockers or that kind of stuff. But the fact that it has the versatility of being a bad shock or a bad Bone Splitter makes me think it's an overall fairly strong card. You can throw it on a flyer on your Thopters, and now you have a 3/1, and that's not too hard of a situation to go into. And Equip 2 is low enough that you can usually play another spell if you want. Not only an expensive spell, but decently solid. Another one of those cards, I think these 2 equipment really do shine as probably the only 2 equipment you're going to want to run. Warhorn, 3 colors. Attacking creatures you control get +1 power, plus no toughness. I don't really see you usually playing this card. If you had a really all-in artifact deck with some of the kind of tap and artifact carrying effects, you might run one of these to go with your Thopters, but this card does nothing in so many spots in the game that I'm rarely running it unless I just care about an artifact count purely. So it's a low pick and a low speculative spot for it. So here we go. Alchemist Vial, 2 colorless. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Sacrifice it. 1 sacrifice it. Target creature can't attack or block this turn. A low effect, low cost artifact that replaces itself. Again, this is going to the deck that cares about artifacts. You're not normally going to want to run it. I will say that it's an excellent 23rd card if you just really don't have anything else you want to run, because you just pay the 2 colors to draw the card. So it immediately kind of cycles itself through. You don't want to run a lot of these. You just want to kind of run them in the filler slot, or if you have something that helps with artifacts, it'll become much more powerful. Very late pick. Guardians of Meletis, 3 colors for an 06 defender. You'll know the decks when you want this. It'll be rare, but it holds back attackers for quite some time. It doesn't kill them. So your opponents are going to just keep amassing more and more cards. Guardian Automaton, 4 for 3/3. That's fine in colors. Consistent. Always get to play it. Decent amount of power and toughness overall. And when it dies, you gain 3 life. A fringe benefit. I don't know if I'm going to be normally picking this card in most of my decks. Like, I'd rather overall not run a 4/4 or a 3/3 for 4, but I also don't mind it. Just middle of the road, kind of a late pick. 1 colorless for 2/1 Bonded Construct, can't attack alone. This might see standard play depending on how many creatures they need for that, but probably not being able to have attack with another creature. Not good enough for constructed. You really don't want it by itself. The fact that it costs 1 mana doesn't really mean much because it's not going to attack early. You don't have the haste to take advantage of that, and the fact that it is 1 toughness is an unnecessary risk. And Veteran Sidearm, 2 colors to play, 1 to equip. Equip creature gets +1/+1. It's just not enough of an effect. You don't normally want to play this card. Yeah, it can make an okay 23rd card. The fact that the equip cost is so low is decent, but the actual effect is also pretty low. So usually it's not providing enough power and toughness to affect the board meaningfully, but I wouldn't be embarrassed to have it in my deck. I think as far as equipment and artifacts go, Sigil of Valor and Throwing Knife are really the only 2 equipments I'll usually play in most of my decks. And as far as artifact creatures go, Guardian Automaton, Ruined Servitor, Goldforge Sentinel, and Chief of the Foundry are decent there. I don't think... Oh, well, Mage Read Responder, Hangerback, Walker are fine as well. But most of the artifacts here are just really not that playable, which is unfortunate considering the strong sort of artifact matters theme going on here. All right, let's look at our uncommons, or sorry, double colored cards. We've got a whole set. And we'll start here with Iroh's Champion. 1 red, white, 2/2, double strike. Powerful. With your combat tricks, you'll be able to get through more damage. Now, it's important to remember, regardless of how strong these cards are, you're almost never going to pick a double colored card, just because the chances of you playing it are so low. This card's fine. It's going to, hit for 4 damage to your opponent, and it's a hard creature to block. It represents a lot of threats with tricks. Goes well in your decks with some amount of renown because it can take advantage of that as well. Possessed Scab, 3 colors, blue-red for a zombie. It's a 3/2. When it enters,
Blue-black.
Yeah, sorry, blue-black. When Possessed Scab enters the battlefield, return target instant, sorcery, or creature card from your graveyard to your hand. If it would die, exile it instead. I'm fine playing 5 for a 3/2. This goes in a slower deck. Possibly the graveyard deck, possibly not. The fact that it can get back a creature, instant, or sorcery means it's basically always going to get something back. Your most relevant card.
But it's got the exile on it, so you can't loop it or anything, which is what, when I see this card, I would say, how am I going to abuse this as much as possible?
Yeah, you don't have to do that much to get a lot of it. Gravedigger is a 2/2 for 4, has been very powerful. This card is also very powerful. The 1 extra mana does make it come in a lot later, but the 1 extra power and the flexibility on it does mean that you're going to be in a position to get back your best stuff and play it late. This goes into a later game deck for most decks, which Black-Blue is happy to do. Thunderclap Wyvern, 2 colorless, white-blue for a 2/3 flying. That's pretty good. Flash. So I can play it as an instant. Also very good. Other creatures you control with flying get +1/+1. This looks like it's going to go in the deck with the blue-white flyers, as it is blue-white. But you also have your Thopters. This gives your Thopters +1/+1. I think this is an extremely powerful card. Can easily eat up a 2/2. We can also put a board where your opponent attacks in, you flash in a Thunderclap Wyvern. Your Thopters, your 2 or 3 Thopters get bigger, this guy gets bigger, maybe you have another flying creature, and your blocks become extremely powerful. I think this is one of the probably the most powerful 2-color card on this set, even though it does have a sort of build around me of wanting flying creatures. You don't need any other flying creatures for this to be bad, though. If you're in blue-white and you see one of these around pack 2, snap it up. It's a strong card. I obviously wouldn't go early in on it because 2-color cards, just not sure if you can play them. Bloodcurse Knight.
Wow, somebody dropped the ball on this one. It's photocopied.
Yeah, the picture quality is a little low. Colorless, white, black for a 3/2. As long as you control an enchantment, it gets +1/+1 and has lifelink. Goes in the enchantment deck. It's fine on its own. The fact that it becomes a 4/3 with lifelink is awesome. And again, not an early pickup, but really fits in that deck well. Very synergistic. You're going to have enchantments usually with that deck, so fairly reliably a 4/3 lifelink for 3. Awesome. Bounding Krasis. I think this is the first maybe constructed playable card if we see it. Colorless, green, blue for a 3/3. It has flash. When it enters the battlefield, you may tap or untap target creature. So it can represent 2 surprise blockers, easily getting you that 2 for 1. You can flash it in to stop an opponent from attacking if you can't really get advantage of that. So it's doing a lot of work on those axes. Just being a 3/3 flash for 3 is strong enough too. I think this is the rawest, strongest card. I still wouldn't first pick it, but it's the card I'd be happy to pick earliest because it asks so little of me, other than just being in 2 colors. Wait, I forgot about Citadel Castellan. Colorless, green, white for 2/3. Vigilance. That card's okay. Renown 2. So let's put your opponent in a tricky spot. You play this on turn 3. They have their creature. They probably have a 2/2. They probably don't have 3 power to represent, so they're probably chump blocking, so you don't get a 4/5 Vigilance. The fact that this has Vigilance in round 2 makes this one of the toughest cards to deal with. It's just brutal early and will just snowball to a quick victory if your opponent can't answer it immediately. The just raw power on the number of games you are going to win when you cast this on turn 3 is astounding. Your opponent is going to have to answer a 4/5 Vigilance most games. This card, I think, is pushing the Renown mechanic, and I think it's probably the best Renown card in the whole game, or the whole set. Still not necessarily picking this first, just because I don't want to commit to 2 colors, especially with the likelihood of them not both being open. Reclusive Artificer, 2 colorless, blue-red for a 2/3 haste. That's serviceable, although not necessarily super exciting. When it enters the battlefield, you may have it deal damage to target creature equal to the number of artifacts you control. You only need 2 artifacts for this to be extremely powerful at getting you that 2 for 1. If for some reason you can develop a very strong artifact deck, this can do upwards of 4, maybe even 5 damage. That's usually killing one of their best creatures. You're usually looking at the 0 to 3 range, or sorry, 0 to 2 range for killing, which is fine. The fact that it's just 4 for a 2/3 haste at the base is fairly solid. Blazing Hellhound, 2 colorless, black, red, 4/3, 1 colorless, sacrifice another creature, deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Solid. I'm happy to pay 4 for a 4/3 in black, red, and it has an upside on ability. That's really all you need on it. Zendikar Incarnate, 2 colorless, green, red for a star 4. Its power is equal number of lands you control. You can play this on turn 4, and it's a 4/4. Serviceable. I'm happy there. Doesn't have to do anything better than that. And in fact, it does. It becomes 5 into 6 into 7. This will be an 8/8. Some games, 9/9. It'll be giant. So it'll trade with anything very large. And it'll keep growing. So this represents a very large threat. It's not normally going to... It'll either kill 2 small creatures or 1 large creature if your opponent's blocking. So that represents quite a bit of damage as well. It's just big, which counts for a lot more than people kind of put into it. It's not as fancy as a lot of these other cards. It's not going to get you as much value in the great scenarios, but on the baseline, I think baseline-wise, Zendikar Incarnate and Citadel Castellan are just the strongest. Shaman of the Pack is colorless, green, black for a 3/2. That's pretty good stats overall for just 3 mana, which is important because this ability is not so exciting. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to the number of elves you control. If there's an elf deck, this will probably be played in standard. Just nice, you know, if you drafted the elf deck or a moderately elfy deck and you're running... If you're in black-green, you should just run this card. It drains for 1, which is fine, but it's 3 for a 3/2. That's fine. And if you're running some amount of elves, it can do more. It can win you the game and all these other things, but it doesn't really have to do much to get you ahead. I do believe that's everything except for lands. Let's check out the lands and call it a day. We have the Shockland set. Or sorry, the Painland set.
Why is it called that?
Because it taps to add 1 colorless or 1 black and deals 1 damage to you. Or you can tap for colors. All these are fine. They're not early picks. You'd rather not run them in your deck. They have a good value. They'll probably be worth $1 or $2 each. So don't be shy about picking them, but if you would like to win the matches, I wouldn't pick them early. They're not really doing a lot for you. I will run these over basic lands. They're better than basic lands if you're in those two colors. Foundry.
Well, I guess you do fucking live here, didn't you?
Oh, man. Here we are streaming. Nick came in, cursing and such. Brad's here, too.
So you didn't drink that drink?
We replaced Brad. We have Ash here instead. Better, stronger.
She's way more good looking than I am.
Way more good looking than Brad.
I can get you a wig.
We can get Brad a wig. All right.
I still don't have all the prerequisites.
Is Brad squishing in here?
Yeah.
Brad,
Brad's face. Oh, look, it's Brad's face. Oh, it's a little tumor over here. Our little tumor.
Your viewership just drops like.
No.
yeah, we went
lost.
from 3 to 2.
No. All right. Foundry of the Consoles. Land colorless. 5 sacrifice. Foundry of the Consoles. Put 2/1/1 Thopters
Great.
with flying on the battlefield. I like this card. I would run up to 2 of them. They kind of represent a couple of free cards on your lands. Being like this, you don't want to run too many. You only have so many flex slots on your colors. But if you're not splashing for another card or color, if you're not playing 3 colors, 2 of these will serve you very well. Even 3 if your color requirements aren't too high. It's kind of with the. You're probably not going to see that many being an uncommon. Rogue's Passage, 1 colorless. Adds a colorless to your mana pool. Pay 4. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. I'll be happy to run one of these as well. The fact that it allows me to push through damage at any point of the game and is a colorless source is also very powerful. These are very powerful and colorless lands, as is Majoring Network. Tapping for 1 mana straight up, 1 to put a storage counter on it. Any turn you don't do anything, this represents an additional mana for later. You can tap it to remove X counters and add X to your mana pool.
How is that? How does that like work as a strategy? I guess.
So usually you will just play this when you don't have something else to play. So you'll play it on any turn where you don't need the colored mana, which is most turns. And then each turn you don't use up all of your mana. Each turn you have 2 mana.
Oh, okay.
You add another counter onto it. Add another counter to it. And you don't have to use all those counters at once. You may have 3 counters on it, and on turn 4 you only have 4 lands. Well, you can remove 2 counters and remove 2 counters to represent 5 mana over 2 turns. And lots of other ways right there. So it's a powerful card. I think all 3 of these cards are very strong and flexible. They all do different things, offering sort of a ramp strategy, an aggressive strategy, more defensive card here, but you won't see these around too often, and running any 2 of the 3 of these would be great. And an Evolving Wild's letting you play 2 colors, possibly a splash if you wanted as well. I think overall, we're seeing a lot of wide themes here. I think red, black, and green look especially good. Green has a lot of card advantage in this set, which we don't see that much. Red was very aggressive overall, not having many big creatures whatsoever. Black has a lot of killing spells in this, not necessarily any big creatures for the most part, or really super effective creatures, but just a lot of removal. This set looks actually to be fairly... This set looks fairly card advantage based, but I wouldn't say slow. There's a lot of aggressive cards throughout all the colors. Right? So Ash was with us today. I think we're jumping out. That should be the whole set. We might try to sneak in here tomorrow if we can, but probably not happening. I hope you guys enjoy your pre-releases this weekend. Tell us some of your stories if you'd like. Remember, we are at mobiuspick@gmail.com. We're on YouTube at Mobius